Oh, Danny's got headphones. He's fancy.
It's the way to do it.
I don't know where I feel like I'm supposed to look. Like, do I look in the camera, or do I just like make eye contact with you?
All right.
I don't like looking right into the camera.
Was that NWA?
That was NWA because Compton was the closest thing I could think of. That was the closest song I could think of to South Central. Compton was straight out of Compton because USC is in South Central, and today's guest on the Hangout is Scott Enyeart, who has. Am I saying that right, Scott?
Good enough. Enyeart. I get both. As I've heard worse, so you're good.
Okay, good. Just as long as I'm not the worst. So this is another Field Goals Hangout. Today is June 24th. I'm Kenneth Arthur. With us for the second time now is Danny Kelly, the managing editor at Field Goals. Danny, how's it going?
Not too shabby.
And again, Jackson Bevins. Jackson, what's up?
Hey, guys.
He's outside today getting some of that nice outside air. And our guest today is Scott Enyeart. So Scott is an ambassador for Win Forever, and he's going to tell us what that's about and his connections with USC and everything in terms of Pete Carroll. So, Scott, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Win Forever?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Southern California originally. I'm in Seattle now. When I was in Southern California, I was a high school coach for several years. Then I went and coached college 2 years, came back, and ended up at SC. So I've always kind of been a student of Pete Carroll and kind of how he did things early on when he first got to SC and how quick he kind of turned things around. And then in 2000 and I want to say it was 11, so it was after he already got to Seattle, and he kind of launched Win Forever as a more of a branded thing in terms of how they were going to kind of do development for coaches and businesses. He asked me if I wanted to be an ambassador. Some of the other guys are Trent Dilfer, Yogi Roth, just kind of professional athletes and coaches and stuff like that. And so it's kind of one of those things where just real dialed in kind of with what they're doing philosophically and ambassading. Is that a word? Ambassading? Yeah. I am ambass.
So out of high school, you played football in high school and then opted rather than to play to pursue a coaching career, right? Yep. So what exactly is your what are you coaching right now, position-wise, head coach? I know you're at high school, but exactly what is your coaching?
Yeah. So I did a couple years of high school ball down in California. Then I went to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and then came back. Did 2 more years of high school. Spent time at SC. Actually overlapped with Coach in his last year there. And then now I'm coaching at Lakeside School here in Seattle, which is actually the alma mater of Paul Allen, our fearless owner.
Oh, I did not know that. And how's the team doing? How was the team last year, and how do they expect to do this year?
7-3 the past 2 years. We move into a pretty tough conference this year. We play for people who kind of follow football locally here, Eastside Catholic, O'Day, some of the private school powerhouses. So we're good. We'll compete, and I'm coaching offensive and defensive line with them. I don't think I answered that part of your question. So we're in the trenches, and we're getting nasty.
Definitely. Do you follow some of those same philosophies when you watch the Seahawks now? Is it a lot of that same stuff when you're coaching the offensive line? And what parts do you see the Seahawks offensive line and defensive line doing right now that are sort of revolutionary or not revolutionary, or maybe it's just the typical stuff, but that zone blocking scheme, that kind of stuff, do you see it? Are you copying that stuff, or that's for them and it's not for other places to play ball?
Yeah, no, sure. We run a zone blocking scheme. I'm a big believer in that. It's nice when you can run a zone blocking scheme with the size of guys that the Seahawks have. But another school, just for example, that runs a zone blocking scheme is University of Oregon, and Oregon doesn't have those big, the 6'5", 325-pound type guys. They're a little bit leaner, and you're kind of protecting an area more than you are blocking a man. And so it's for basketball guys, it's kind of similar to setting a screen, setting a pick, and it's just getting in the way, chip into the first level, work into the second level, let running backs, do what they get paid to do, and that's make cuts and read those blocks. That's something I do, and it works well for us defensively. And actually, this coincidentally was something that was on the site today. about platooning defensive linemen, and that's something that is pretty unique to the Seahawks, just because they have the depth to do it. Not everybody is has that luxury of depth. But for me and how I like to do things, if you have that luxury, absolutely. You get guys in, keep guys fresh. It's as an offensive lineman, I know it's tough as crap in the second half when you got all of a sudden a fresh guy come in and hit you, and you're tired. You've been playing the whole game. You don't get platooned, and there's someone fresh in front of you every series. And that I think that's when you have the talent that the Seahawks have, where there's not really a drop off from that first guy to that second guy along the. I mean, Mike Bennett was coming off the freaking bench last year.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Imagine how much of a nightmare that truly was for offenses. So, I'm a big believer in what they do. I think it translates really well to the high school level. The difference is all these things that they do can make up for a lack of size, but they have the size, which just makes it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I saw and going back to Win Forever, I met Pete Carroll a few years ago at a Win Forever conference, and this type of stuff, it's not just like coach speak. Like, he really believes in this kind of stuff with his heart 100%. Can you explain a little bit the difference between Win Forever and Always Compete? And since you're an ambassador of Win Forever, just embass for a second if you'd like to.
So Always Compete is kind of the day-to-day, that's really what the philosophy is. Win Forever is kind of an overarching umbrella of kind of what everything falls into. The birth of it actually kind of came when Coach was with the New England Patriots, and he had to play in the AFC North, or AFC East, I'm sorry, and they would go play the Buffalo Bills. And Buffalo had years and years of success. Obviously, they didn't win Super Bowls, but AFC championships, division championships, and it was just kind of one of the things like, wow, year in and year out, they were at the top of their game. And then from there, he got, when Pete was out of coaching, connected with John Wooden a little bit, read John's book, kind of had a light bulb moment. Coach Wooden didn't win his first national championship, I think, for 16 years. So he was at UCLA 16 years before winning a national championship, and then I think he won 10 of the next 11. And it was kind of this moment, hey, when you figure it out, and you stick to it, you're pretty unstoppable. You can do it forever and have unprecedented success. But ultimately, Pete's thing is competition, and you saw it at SC. He would play freshmen. He wasn't shy about it. If you are the guy, and if you can win a spot and you can battle for time, then he's going to play you. He didn't, ever let I'm not going to play this guy because he's too young, hold him back. And that kind of goes back to really something became public this year, and just how he coaches individuals. Calls it learning your learner. Developing a plan for each guy. Kind of letting them know what they can possibly become. And then you have to coach them with that thought in mind, right? You can't coach everybody the same. You're not going to coach Marshawn Lynch the same way that you coach, Russell Wilson, right? They got different buttons you can press, and then so I think
that's like visual versus audio, like those types of things too. He really is in tune with.
Absolutely, and that kind of goes to learning. What works for a guy. Who's a visual learner, who's an auditory learner. Who's a kinesthetic learner. And it just really doing things to highlight their learning processes, and ultimately maximizing what they can become. You don't need to fit square pegs in round holes. You take round pegs for round holes, and you don't. I said it a number. I mean, Brandon Browner, I think, is going to be the perfect example of really how this philosophy works well for guys who maybe aren't, the most skilled guys in the league. I think that he benefited because he had one job, which was press the hell out of people, and it fit into the overall scheme of things that Seattle was trying to do. I don't think he's going to have that same success in New England. And I like Brandon. I think he's a good guy. He's one of the godfathers of the LOB. But you get what I'm saying. So that's a perfect example of taking a guy, maximizing abilities, developing a plan for him, and getting to ultimately play at an All-Pro level or Pro Bowl level.
Jackson, you played football for quite a while, right?
Played is a misnomer. I was
You were part of a team, and you were also part of a pretty important coaching tree. Am I right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Danny and I kind of walked on to PLU's football team together our junior years in college. I played like when I was a sophomore in high school, and that was it. I did baseball. Danny was a great basketball player. But we were living with some football players, and there was a coach there named Frosty Westering. Some of you folks might be familiar with him, Hall of Fame coach. I think when he retired, he's the 8th or 9th winningest coach in college football history, 4 national championships. And he had a really counterintuitive philosophy, at least as far as football is concerned, and he was into servant leadership. Like I remembered, even though I was a walk-on, seniors would carry my bags to practice, carry my gear. Coaches would carry the senior stuff. Just little stuff like that. I mean, we could do a whole segment on Frosty, but he's pretty remarkable guy. And you know, it was there that I truly learned the value of coaching, because I think some coaches can occupy the part of your brain that you use when you're on the field, but I think there's some great coaches that can help occupy the rest of your brain. And I think Pete Carroll, like Foster Westering and John Wooden in that sense, is that he's not just preaching something that's going to affect you on the football field, but it carries over into what you do in the rest of your life. And I think that makes it easier for the guys to embrace it, right? Like once you're applying that to friendships and your relationships and your hobbies and whatever else it is that you do, it's going to be easier to put on that hat on the football field. So, you know, it's an amazing thing that he's able to do. You know, Carroll's able to do that with the Seahawks. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if that was some of the fuel behind turning over basically the entire roster in his first year and a half in Seattle. You know, getting guys that were coming in without expectations, a lot of young players, guys he took a chance on, you know, and I think that it's really cool to see guys talk off the field the way, you know, that Pete Carroll talks off the field.
You know, it's interesting, like, thinking about Pete Carroll now in terms of the NFL, we see a guy that just won one Super Bowl, but, you know, how are we going to see him in 5 years, just like, you know, like Scott just brought up with Wooden, and it took him 16 years, but at college basketball, you could go back to Tom Landry and how unsuccessful he was with the Dallas Cowboys until he won his first Super Bowl and turned that around. And, you know, with Pete Carroll going to USC, we can think, well, he was at USC, they had a successful program, they were set up for success, but they weren't set up for success when he got there. And you can look at a team, you can look at, I don't know what you could call schools franchises, but in a way they are now. But Notre Dame, you know, you could look at Notre Dame and say they should be set up for success every year, but you can see how just being set up to get good recruits isn't necessarily going to make you successful. Danny, you've done a lot of studying on Pete Carroll and philosophies and Bill Walsh and Win Forever. How do you think that sort of Pete Carroll's philosophy applies to success? Do you think that it's, you know, he's one of the best modern coaches of the football era right now, and that we'll see him that way, say, 10 years down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about Carroll that stands out to me is there's a number of things, but he's extremely detail-oriented. Every single thing about their program is like planned to a T, and I think he brings a lot of value because, you know, he's incorporated so many of the things that he's learned over the years into the current program and kind of knows what works and knows how he wants to do everything. And so, first of all, practices are planned to the minute, and they maximize every single minute you have on the practice field, and everybody's running at 100 miles an hour the whole time. And I think, you know, that just in itself, they prepare so well and they're so intense in practice that you know, when they get into a game, it doesn't really feel like any different, and then it's just like all muscle memory, and you know, they're in that zone. And I think that's kind of the thing that he's instilled in these guys, and they've found guys that really buy into that whole philosophy, guys that are going to like practice hard every single rep. And I think, you know, people kind of laugh at the always compete thing, but you know, just because, you know, like Scott said, or Jackson said, like, you know, kind of just a cheerleader type of guy, but at the same time, you know, when you know for a fact that you have guys that are working harder than you, that it just really lights a fire under your ass to work hard. And I think it's a real thing. Like I'll you can apply it to the blog world if you want. Like I know if right after a game or right during the week, like if I know that other guys are going to be writing really like awesome in-depth breakdowns and everything, like that fires me up to like work my ass off and try and like study and find a really cool play and do things like that. It's like it's a real thing. I think people kind of laugh at it, but it's a real thing. Like competition actually works. So and you could apply it to your job or anything. And that's kind of like Pete Carroll applies it to everything. And that's why they get these random people into the program, like guys that have succeeded in other areas or women that have succeeded in other areas of business and other sports, and
like Drake.
except for Drake, everybody but him. No, but I just think I like that about Carroll, how he's always, he would say competing, but he's always looking for little things that they can add, to push him over the top of that. All those little things add together, and actually there's, I think, good results from all that stuff. Like for instance, bringing the people in, it kind of humanizes these people who are the champions of industry or champions at whatever sport they're in, and it shows people that these are just regular people. They just work their asses off, and this is how they got to that point. And I think everything is really meticulous and thoughtful and on purpose. Everything that they do is on purpose.
Right. I mean, just speaking of competition, and I think Jackson had said something, tweeted something on Sunday during the World Cup where it's like, if you got something to say about something that happened, you better think of it in 30 seconds because everybody's going to tweet something like immediately, right? So you have to, everybody, even in regular life, you got to be on your toes if you want to. You're looking over, you got this guy and the next guy right next to you. Scott, if there's anything that, in your experiences with Pete Carroll and with what you've learned from him as a coach, if there's anything that you wanted people to know about Pete Carroll or about his coaching philosophy that maybe they didn't know, what would that be?
Well, I think, truthfully, the most maybe understated thing about Coach and just how he does things, for as much credit as we give him, philosophically and just his approach and, being a player's coach and, all those things, the guy is one of the greatest coaches of all time from an X's and O's standpoint. Mm-hmm. And I think that was talked about a little bit. I think people started to kind of discover that leading up to the Super Bowl. I think maybe Grantland even did a piece on it. But I think that's one of the most misunderstood or most understated things about Pete is just that he, his ability as just a game planner. I mean, you figure, the Broncos job that Shanahan got, he was up for. I mean, he's always been in the mix. He was a young head coach, for the Jets. He was, the Patriots. He was the guy that, succeeded Parcells, and I don't think many people know this, but he had, I think at the time, one of the best winning percentage, second best to maybe it's third best now with Belichick there, but
I think it's second.
Yeah,
I think it's second.
Yeah, second best winning percentage in Patriots history. And Bob Kraft talked about how because of the experience with Parcells that he's a little gun shy and letting the kite string out for Pete and letting him really do things his way. He could be in Boston doing this stuff right now, but Belichick was able to. And so I think that's the thing. It wasn't like he just kind of discovered how to do things as much as he was finally afforded opportunities. SC created the opportunity where he kind of had total autonomy to run the program his way, and then Paul Allen gave it to him in Seattle. And I think there's something to be. There's guys that have had full control, full roster control before that haven't been able to do that. Do what he's done. Parcells had it a number of places. There's handfuls of guys who have had it. Harbaugh wants it. But at the end of the day, I think that says something too, just about how there's been great coaches in this league that have had this kind of control and haven't been able to do what Pete and quite honestly and John have been able to do together. And I think that's something that probably doesn't get noted as much either, because there's guys that have gotten this and failed. This isn't the reason for the success. It's how he's handling it that ultimately is leading to the success.
There was a story, and he wrote in Win Forever about how when he got to the Patriots, he was talking about how they were setting up the lunch for the team, or a dinner maybe, and Pete was, planning out the dinner. He wanted to do specific, whatever to give, because like he's very into like nutrition and the power of, feeding your body correctly, and I think that's a big part of their program. That, and like they have, they spend a lot of time making sure every player gets the correct amount of sleep and all that stuff, so their bodies are primed and ready to go and everything like that. Things that you wouldn't really think about. It's like I don't know if all NFL teams do that. Maybe now they do more, but like back in the day, they certainly didn't. And this was a Bill Walsh thing too. Like back in the day, Bill would plan everything to a T. Like sit people in specific spots. Things that's kind of detail they got to. And Pete Carroll talked about how when he was planning a dinner with the Patriots, he was setting the menu, and Robert Kraft said something like, "No, this is what we eat." And Pete relates in the book, like, and that's when I knew I was going to fail in New England. Like, or not, that's not what he said, but that's when I knew that I was going to be in trouble, because, like, when Kraft is not letting him choose the menu, like, that's a bad sign. That shows he doesn't trust him to like have full control, and that's kind of what I've done a lot. I really am fascinated with how Pete Carroll kind of runs the program. He's very much like a CEO. Like, he's like Steve Jobs, like he is that company. Or he's the Seahawks, and I think the messaging, the very specific language he uses. I think he's extremely meticulous about the language he uses. He's a motor mouth. We talked about this week at the site. He's a motor mouth, and he kind of like says the weirdest shit all the time. But like I think it's extremely planned. And,
it's
like,
calculated. It's
calculated, exactly. Everything he says is like branding.
Yeah.
And his whole team takes that on.
Well, and even when he's talking to media, he's sending messages to players. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah.
That
he's a psychology guy, like he's all about motivating. Everything he does is like a motivating thing, I swear.
Well, he one of his kind of mantras, everything counts, right? And
Yeah.
that what you're talking about is really kind of a perfect example of him, carrying that to the fullest extent. Everything counts. What you eat counts. Where you sit in meetings. One of the things that Pete does every year, and he's done this since SC, is when the team comes back at the beginning. It'll be probably at the beginning of fall camp, or maybe at the OTAs, or at one point each year. At SC, it was always the start of fall camp. It's all right, everybody usually kind of gravitates to the seats that they sat in last year, right? I'm the guy front row, fourth seat. I know where I'm at. This is my spot. And he makes them get up, move seats, and he doesn't let them kind of look through the rear view. It's always looking through the windshield. And so that's a thing. It's the little nuances like that, to keep their focus always looking ahead rather than looking back. And, you think, it's just a seat. What's it matter? But, it's not. It's symbolic. And in fact, I think there's a story about when he did that his first year. I think it was T.J. Hushmanzada, but I don't know.
Yeah, we talked about that. We wondered who that was, and he was gone like a week later.
Yeah, the guy refused to move. So, all right, you're out of here.
I think I think that it was the Deion Grant is what another person had a good case that Deion Grant got released like that day or the next day or something like that. But yeah, I think that as far as If the funny thing is that if you could pick a career to be up to this point, I think you might even just say that Pete Carroll, everything that he's been through over the last 25 years is perfect. Like, if you went and looked and you see from his coaching background to his strengths, which is secondary, you'd say, what would you most like to be able to do right now? Stop passing offenses. And when he was doing that in the 80s with the Minnesota Vikings, to think that, 30 years later it'd be what would get them the Super Bowl, it's like, it's perfect, and I also was looking at some teams from the 90s, and it happened to come across the Patriots, who had in '98 they had one of the toughest schedules, but they went I think they had the tough schedule in the league, and they went 9-7 under Pete Carroll and made the playoffs, and they lost. But I was looking at that team, and you see Lawyer Malloy is 24 and Ty Law is 25, and these guys are going to the Pro Bowl for the first time in their careers after a couple. He didn't bring them in, but he had drafted Bucky Jones that year. And it's like, this is a guy that just knew how to make players into excellent secondary players. And then he goes to USC and he learns how to deal with young guys, and he learns how to become more of a coach without, and being able to control and manage a locker room, I feel like, and be able to to be the guy, and then he's coming into Seattle, and all these young players are coming up, and he knows who Richard Sherman is, and he knows who Doug Baldwin is, and it's like these guys.
Pipeline.
Yeah, and these guys that he's had experience recruiting, and it's like if you could pick the perfect coach in the perfect position with what he's been through, and Pete Carroll talks about those times that he was fired from the Patriots and the Jets, and it's like on those days he felt terrible, but now it's made him what he is now, which is, he's got national championships and Super Bowls. Jackson, when you look at Pete Carroll from what you've experienced with him over the last 4 years, why do you think that the Seahawks stand a greater chance of repeated success, whereas since the Patriots in 2004, we haven't seen a team really repeat success? For whatever reason it was, they weren't able to get back to that same level. So why do you think that the Pete Carroll and the Seahawks are going to not fall into that trap this upcoming season?
Well, I don't know that they won't. I doubt the Packers, when they had that incredible season and won the Super Bowl, thought that they were going to fall off. Like you said, no one's repeating. I went to the Packers there because I think that team was one of the best teams in the last 10 years, and they fell off. The Ravens fell off after winning the Super Bowl. It happens. Winning in the NFL is one of the hardest things to do as a team in sports. So much is required. So I think the Seahawks are probably a little more insulated from that than a lot of teams. A lot of times you see Super Bowls won by players who are peaking, and or you'll see sort of a mortgage the future move by the front office to bring in talent that's unsustainable on the roster. But you don't really have either of those things with Seattle. You've got a lot of players that are still presumably on the upswing of their careers in the first 3-4 years. They're going to get better if they follow the trend of other good young players. There's a philosophy in place. They're not hamstrung from a financial standpoint as far as, having to cut some of their best players. They're in a good position to avoid the drop-off. But they also lost 3 games last year, and it was only 3, but any of them could have come in the playoffs, and someone else is the champion. I mean, the Seahawks were a few yards away from not even playing in the Super Bowl. So no matter how good you are, everyone in the NFL is really fucking good at football, and if they play at their best, they can beat you. So, like I said, I think that Seattle's well insulated against a drop-off, but I'm certainly not guaranteeing that they're going to win the ship again next year.
You told us before that you were going to guarantee it. What the heck?
Dude, I totally bailed on the spot.
Oh, well.
Danny, why do you think, we've talked about it recently, why do you think that the Pete Carroll can do what he did at USC or not do what he did at USC? Obviously, anything can happen, like Jackson mentioned. This is tough sports, 32 teams. At least 12 of them have a good shot, probably more. But why exactly do you think the Seahawks have a better shot than, say, the 2010 Saints or, the Ravens last year?
Well, I think, I'd echo Jackson's thoughts, that there's always a little bit of an element of luck that goes into every season in terms of injuries, the ball bouncing your way, things just like that, where you can't really control anything. And then obviously, like Jackson said, there's really good teams. But I think I'm optimistic on the Seahawks remaining, as contenders for at least a year or two, longer at least, just because I think, I think his mental approach to the game in terms of, he's developed sort of this program around competing. It's like the whole program. It's all the messaging. It's his whole philosophy is based on win forever. It's everything they say all the time is based on playing at a high level for a long period of time. It's not like, it's not just let's win this year. It's like let's win 10 years. Let's win every year. And so he's put a whole bunch of effort into the right language, the right messaging, and in terms of getting players in the right mindset for ways to do that. I think contradictory to what I say there. It's like, they're very, very cognizant that you just have to take it one day at a time. It's that Wilson cliche, but it's true. It's like they don't have guys talking about next year's championship. They don't have guys talking about anything. They just talk about how hard they can practice today. And I played sports, so I don't know, if I just buy into it more because of that, but I really buy into the mental aspect of the game. I think, that there's such a razor's edge in terms of confidence, like how important confidence is in sports. And I think that Carroll spends such a huge amount of time on confidence, and they do a lot of their scouting on confidence. It's like one of their biggest things, the grit factor they talk about. I think that gives Seattle an edge, and it's not like they have a huge edge in that. Obviously, guys playing in the NFL are confident. I think just the overall culture that he's created in Seattle, I think, is really conducive. It's conducive to keeping everybody at this supremely confident level, and they have ways of insulating against guys getting down on themselves and all that. And I think Scott knows more about that too. But it's like I just believe in that stuff because just being a part of a team in my past, obviously I wasn't anything special, but just I know how, from my experience, it's extremely important to have that confidence.
Scott, same question to you, but also what do you think Pete's doing to make sure that the young players aren't thinking about last season and are just focusing on what they have to do today rather than trying to brag about how they're the defending champions, which doesn't exactly seem like something that Carroll would care about.
Yeah, so when you even look at the Super Bowl last year, right? We see the locker room footage from the post-game celebration, and they get a break at the end. It's what's next. Eyes are immediately ahead, and that was the thing at SC. They had a lot of unprecedented success there, so he's got experience dealing with this before on a different level. The number one, in fact, I pulled up a quote for you guys that
looks like it's coming straight from hell, but go ahead.
What happened?
Your face, the screen got all red.
Oh, yeah, 'cause it's got a red background or whatever. Yeah. Let me have a little light. Is that better? Yeah. I changed I opened the other window. And
he sold his soul for this clip.
No, that's how much I mean. It says, every spring we set out to find out if we could reclaim and rediscover the work ethic and competitiveness that got us there the year before. To me, that's our number one objective. Knowing you can practice really hard with great effort and energy, we can accomplish the stuff that we're trying to get done. From the first day on, it's been a great spring. Guys have answered the call, so that's a little bit more specific to SC. He said, every spring we recapture the attitude, mentality, and intensity tempo of the program. We've got a certain amount of time to come together before a bowl game. We have the same amount of time in the spring. And, so it gets a little bit specific there. But ultimately, that's the focus that they kind of are really trying to, encapsulate is just the, ability to recapture the work ethic, right? Everybody's got drive for their first Super Bowl, right? It's like, there's veterans, Red Bryant, Chris Clemens, the guys that were veterans that, certainly they're gone now, but, you've got the Marshawn, you've got those guys that want that first one, right? And so now it's finding a way to be hungry again, and the motivator is recapturing the work ethic because you can't control what's going to happen, right? And their goal is win the NFC West. It's not win the NFC, it's not win the Super Bowl. It's own the NFC West. And so it's going to be teaching those young guys that, the guys that they just drafted. But again, what's next? Like that's the mentality. They've been preparing for this season before they even left the site of the end of last season. They left that locker room with eyes on this season already, and he's got experience with it, and the focus is going to be really recapturing, that work ethic and that intensity.
Yeah, they did kind of get like a 30-minute head start on the next season than most Super Bowl winners. Just being able to take that second half and be like, okay, guys, let's start practicing for next season. All right, so we've gone over some more Pete Carroll and stuff. We're going to try and get some other topics in here real quick. Since it's the off season, we have less to talk about necessarily with what's going on with the Seahawks this week. There is some stuff that we can talk about, but getting into the hottest takes segment, just talking about the Washington Redskins, which is the hottest take of the last week. News coming down that they're going to lose their trademark or whatever, which doesn't necessarily mean that they can't use Redskins or that just anyone can use Redskins. They still have certain other mandates in place, but other places are starting to take a stand and say you can't say something as offensive as Redskins as your team name. Meanwhile, other places, the Seattle Times recently said they're not going to say Redskins. Other publications are going in the same direction, even close ones to here, that they're not going to use Redskins. But online polls, some other votes that I've seen say that most people aren't really, they'd be fine with just calling it the Redskins. Danny, what are your thoughts on the team Redskins? Is it offensive? I mean, especially coming from the Seattle area where we have team names, like I went to a high school and we were Tillicum or we were Sammamish. Like there are certain areas where it's like the Native American heritage is very important, and here we have a team that's just going to say, how about those savage Redskins? So what are your thoughts, Danny?
Well, because Jackson and I actually both went to Squalicum High School, which is another tribe up the tribal name. Yeah, so
you guys just got a new head coach.
Did they? Cool. So my thoughts are, I'll just keep it simple. I think they should change it, and I think it's gotten to the point where enough people, not enough. Like I just think the fact that if Native Americans find it offensive, it's considered a derogatory term. Just change it. Like I don't know. I think right now the only reason Snyder's keeping it is because he wants the money from the trade or like from the historical name. Like. At this point, it's not like a moral issue for him. He just like wants the marketing power that name holds. So, but I mean, to me, it's just like I just think they should change it. I mean, they changed the bullets for crying out loud because that was too violent.
Right.
Who gives a shit?
It's teams in Washington, not the names of them.
Yeah. I don't know.
Too much time on their hands.
It's like for me, it's just simple. I just think they should change it.
Jackson, same question, just piggybacking off his thoughts. Danny just basically, he forced you to agree with him anyway because he said you guys both went to the same high school, and that was you got to agree. But go ahead and actually make it hot. This is hottest take. So what's your hottest take, Jackson?
Personally, I think it's kind of bullshit that the U.S. Patent Office is taking it away. I'd like to see them change the name too. I mean, people find it offensive. It doesn't matter whether I find it offensive. I'm a white male. I don't exactly have the deck stacked against me. It's not really my place to tell other people what they should do.
Would you be offended if they changed it to the Washington White Males?
It depends on what they make the mascot look like, I suppose. But yeah, people find it offensive. They should change it. I don't know. I don't get too political, but I don't know. It's government's job to step in and tell them they have to change it. But I don't understand, federal patent laws either. It's just what it does is it just opens it up for other people to make money off of the Redskins based on the business success of the Redskins franchise. So I don't know. It'd be great if they changed it. I don't think they should have their hand forced by Uncle Sam to do it, but. Yeah, it's whatever. It
does bring in another issue. Yeah, it does bring in another issue of the patent office saying, "Oh, we're gonna put our agenda on you." Like that's not any of their business, right?
Well, let's not get into the politics of it.
That's an SB Nation edict. We're not allowed to talk about.
This is actually pretty much against the rules, so let's just move on from that one.
Sorry.
Wait, I don't get to get my hot sports take?
No, Scott, you can definitely give your take on the Washington Redskins name.
Change it to the Foreskins and then see if people are upset.
There you go.
Moving on.
Okay, so I thought that they should change their name to the States, and then they could just be the Washington States.
That would be confusing.
Danny, I already grew up thinking that my first team that I rooted for was the Washington Redskins because I thought that was us.
Guilty, man. Totally guilty. Probably like 7.
Oh, my God.
That's hilarious.
I didn't live in Seattle, so I didn't think of Seattle anything. It was just like, oh, yeah, you're in Washington Redskins.
Yeah.
Danny, this week you wrote about your first version of the 53-man roster prediction. No offense, undoubtedly you'll be wrong somewhere. It's going to be a lot of changes between now and when.
But what if he's not? Just what if?
I mean, he could be. There's no reason. There's a perfectly reasonable argument. Danny, which of those picks, though, when you're getting down to the last, say, 3 players, where you think are the most ones where you most likely are not going to be, you're wavering a little bit?
Well, I think, first of all, I had said that Jordan Hill was on the bubble, and in my take, he was off the roster. And that I don't feel strongly about at all. It's just kind of how it ended up going when I was putting that all together. I think on the defensive line, you have guys like Jesse Williams, Jordan Hill, Jimmy Staton, who we know exactly zero about. Then you have guys like, then there's the addition of Kevin Williams and Greg Scruggs and Benson Mayowa, and you just have so many of these guys that we don't have a lot of information on, and I think that the way that each of these guys can kind of play multiple positions is just really hard to figure out like how they'll end up going on it. So for me, the defensive line, like the interior defensive line specifically, I think that's just a huge toss-up right now to try and predict what will happen, and who knows if any of the they could always make trades and things like that. So. And then the other thing that I don't really know, I don't feel strongly about is the running back situation. I don't know if they're going to go with Spencer Ware, if they are really high on keeping Derek Coleman, or if they'll just keep 4 running backs perhaps. Where does Kiero Smalls fit in? Or so there's obviously these are good problems to have because there's going to be some players that I really like that I think that they'll end up releasing. And then there's also guys like Demetrius Bronson, who's new to the program, and he's kind of got an interesting history. So I don't know. I just think for me, the 2 positions I had the most trouble sort of figuring out were running back and defensive line.
Right, and in a way, you're making more of a statement about, say, carrying a certain number of running backs more so than what player that could be, right? Because it's like you think they might go with a more traditional fullback, so you pick Small over Coleman.
Yeah.
It doesn't really. They're interchangeable.
I feel like there's a reason they drafted Small. I think, they use a draft pick on a fullback. First of all, that's not that common, and they felt the need. They felt strong enough about getting that guy. Because fullbacks typically you can get them in UDFA market pretty easily. There's not a strong demand for those guys. And so the fact that they used a draft pick on him, I think it says something. And I think sort of, just if you're reading tea leaves, I think it says that they didn't feel that the whole let's convert a running back to a fullback experiment was really working all that well last year. They're kind of like throwing Phil Bates into the mix last year. Spencer Ware never really seemed to give much of a crap about being a fullback. He kind of feels like he wants to be a running back. And I think Derek Coleman did a really good job, and he obviously has a really great story, and he's a really hard worker and all that, stuff that really fits into Pete Carroll's program. I think that's really important too. But I think, there was a reason they brought Mike Robb back, and there's a reason that he got most of the reps later in the year. I just don't know if they saw enough from Derek Coleman at fullback to be content there. They're not going to be content anyway. Because
right,
they're always they literally live the always compete thing. That even if they're really they traded for a quarterback, things like that. It's like they're always trying to light fires, like we were talking about earlier, Scott. He's such a manipulator.
Right.
So it's who knows what it means, but it's hard to really predict. Obviously, based on the last 4 years of my trying to predict anything, I've been horribly inaccurate when I try and guess, but
Scott, is there anything that you've seen since the draft or heard since the draft or whatever, what player that you think has really risen really closer to making the roster that most people wouldn't have expected?
Well, just looking at Danny's list specifically, I think Jackson Jeffcoat is one who I'm kind of intrigued by. The problem is where does he fit, right? Like I think that he was an absolute steal. To get as an undrafted free agent. the popular comparison for Jackson Jeffcoat really is Michael Sam, right? They're both conference MVPs, similar positions, similar stats. One guy went drafted, one guy didn't, and arguably Jackson Jeffcoat probably had the more consistent success during his college career. But then the thing is you look at the defensive line, you got the veterans in at the Leo position. Cliff Averill, I don't think he's going anywhere. Mayowa, yeah, or Schofield. I think that's just, I don't know. They both, to me, I showed a lot last year. It's like, hey, O'Brien Schofield was a steal, and so, Jeffcoat would be kind of the one that would be, one to keep an eye on. Cassius Marsh, I was pretty critical of the draft pick. Especially at the fourth round. I'm still not completely sold that he makes the team. Obviously, a fourth round pick would be pretty high not to make the team, but I don't know really how he fits. He doesn't seem like a great scheme fit. But Pete's a motivator. That guy, he's had an interesting career. I remember when he was in high school down in California at Oaks Christian, and I was down there at the same time. And so he's someone I've kind of followed for a long time, and just because of where he was from and the schools that were recruiting him, and I don't know. I wasn't that high on him. I was a little bit shocked at the pick, and just from a mentality standpoint, he didn't seem like a fit. But we've talked about Pete's ability to motivate and buy in or get out. So I'm sure he'll buy in. I could see maybe him not making it and Jeffcoat making it. And then offensively, I think the way that you phrased it, Kenneth, is probably pretty much exactly how I'd say it. Maybe it's not necessarily those same 5 running backs, but it's the structure of the personnel, it's the numbers. Whether it be smaller Coleman, I don't know. Pete's always been really interesting with how he used fullbacks. He likes guys that can catch the ball out of the backfield. Stanley Havili was the one at SC that obviously everybody really remembers. I do agree with actually one thing that I definitely agree with is the cut IR ghost roster of Pryor, and talking to guys post that move. Everybody tried to figure out, is he going to be a punt returner? Is he going to be a tight end? No, he's a quarterback. And the days of a 7th round pick, being expected or probable to make the team are kind of long gone. And they gave up, and that was that was exactly how they phrased it to me. It's like we give up. He's a quarterback. He's gonna have a chance to compete. Push some of the other guys, churn the roster a little bit, and if he doesn't make it, we gave up nothing to get him.
Maybe
and so
light a fire under T-Jack's ass, maybe.
Yeah, or B.J. Daniels or whatever. Who knows? But just if he makes it, cool. But I don't think that. That school of thought with him specifically, where everybody's like, he can do a million things, and this is a great steal. It's like, nah, it's a 7th round pick that you gave up. You spent it wisely. Terrell Pryor was your 7th round pick, right? What do you got?
It's funny to me. What's funny about I've been doing this for 3 years now, I think, and I think one of the biggest things that's changed my mentality is I still do fall victim to it, but I don't get excited about the prospect of a gadget player as much as I used to. I think it's it's always so exciting to think about, but then they come on for one play a game and they're it's just not even worth thinking about, honestly.
Well, we haven't used them that much, truthfully. It's like, so you just kind of.
I get into it too, believe me. I'm intrigued by Pryor as a gadget type of guy, but it's just not, I just don't see it happening. I'm really cynical about that right now.
So I don't really know if I answered your question, Kenny. I think that was more just my analysis of Dan He's article, but that's kind of my take.
Jackson, we're moving on a little bit to just I wrote this week about toughest moments in Seahawks history, or just sort of your fandom and those losses that really felt like the biggest punch in the gut. And we've had a couple recently, and then a couple in our history. Jackson, what would you say is the toughest loss that you've been a part of watching the Seahawks?
Super Bowl 40 was a pretty shitty experience, but I think that's
my answer.
The universal one there. Other ones that stand out was the Vinny Testaverde helmet touchdown game that knocked the Seahawks out of the playoffs, and it was, I think, the play that finally got instant replay into the NFL. Let's see. I remember when Ryan Grant fumbled on like his first 2 carries in the playoffs as a Packer in the snow against the Seahawks, second round of the playoffs, and Seattle was up 14-0.
Oh yeah, that game.
After the coin flip, and I was just like, this is crazy. And like an hour later, Brett Favre's like carrying his teammates off the field, putting snowballs at them because they're up by 8 touchdowns, and that one was tough. But my first real sucky Seahawks memory, weirdest thing, and I don't know why it stands out, but when I was a real little kid, I really loved Derek Fenner. He was a fullback, and well, it must have been the late 80s, and for some reason I really liked him. Maybe he like came to the local supermarket to sign autographs or something, but he was my guy. And I remember hearing about him getting suspended because he was caught with, I think, cocaine, and my parents had to explain to me why Derek Fenner wasn't allowed to play football, and that was like me, my first moment as a little kid, like waking up to the fact that these are like people and there's consequences and stuff like that. But yeah, those are the ones that leapt to mind.
I almost miss the times when your favorite player got suspended for cocaine as compared to cheating or whatever, like performance-enhancing drugs, where it used to just be like, that guy's having too much fun, and now it's just like, oh no, this guy's trying to get an edge. Not that, I don't know, I'm sure cocaine can give you an edge. Danny, what exactly would you say is your answer? For me, the whole thing about the Super Bowl, it's a shitty loss in theory, because when your first Super Bowl takes place at 3 in the afternoon, I was 3 pitchers deep by that point. What about you, Danny? What was your worst loss?
Well, I mean, it's like, I think last year, and when I say last year, I mean 2012, when they lost to the Falcons, is obviously really depressing. And obviously the Super Bowl 40 was really depressing. To me, it's funny because this past year obviously ended with the highest of highs, and it was like a magical season and all that, like, in every way. But I remember being so depressed after the Seahawks lost to the Colts this year, just because, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's like the worst loss ever, but like in my blogging experience, like I think that was the most depressed I was, just because they blew so many chances to win that game. And it was just like the most frustrating thing to me. Remember, I went on like a diatribe after it, just breaking down like everything, like starting with the Malcolm Smith safety that should have been a touchdown, going to all these different things that they ended up like getting called back on penalties and all these things. And it's just like, for whatever reason, I was just like so depressed after that game, and it really stuck with me. But I mean, obviously the big ones were that Atlanta game was totally soul crushing, and then the Super Bowl game, obviously.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about where they finished, and then that loss to the Colts, which was, right next to that almost loss to the Texans, where they could have been if they didn't. There were definitely a lot of missed opportunities. Like, they weren't playing that good, but they were playing good enough to win almost of the games. But it was like it was on that edge for a little while. Scott, what about you?
Well, I think it was funny because when we emailed kind of our agenda or whatever, I thought about this one a little bit. And when you think of the cliche games like the Super Bowl and the Falcons game last year, I think, those would be the easy ones to answer. But winning the Super Bowl kind of healed a lot of those wounds, right? So as I thought back, I was like, the games that were like the worst moments in my Seahawks fandom, not so bad anymore. Like, you kind of look at it through a different
Ultimately,
lens.
they don't matter.
Yeah. I think for me, though, like, when it's really, there's one that I always kind of point to, and it was the Bengals game in 2011.
Yeah.
And I was at that game, and I flew up for the game, and it was a game that they should have won. And I purposely picked that game when I got tickets from coaches. Like, I was saying, when you go on a road, like when you go to see your team play, like, make sure they're going to win, right? So I don't try to pick the big game that everybody wants to go to. I want to be like, all right, let's go, so I know it's going to be a good trip, right? So I picked that Bengals game on purpose. And, I went with Davis, actually. And, they lost the game. And, there's an emotional attachment. It's like when Coach got the job, I wanted him to be really successful here. and it was my team, my coach, and it was kind of that perfect storm. And I remember after that game, Mitch Levy on the radio, we're 24 games into the Pete Carroll era, and I'm saying it now, there's only 24 left. And I remember being on the phone with Yogi Roth in the car when Mitch is saying, he's like, what are they saying, man? And I told him, he goes, good. It was just kind of like, you hadn't heard anybody be that hard on Pete probably since the Patriots, since he was dealing with Boston media. And, I mean, this town was ready to just turn on him. And but we also saw the glint, he called, I remember he talked about that, going for it right before the half, hormonal, the whole kick it or try and score on fourth down. But we saw glimpses then, too, at Richard Sherman, and, there were bright spots. And that was the first game, I think Tavares came back with a torn pec, and that was just a real low point because it's just kind of like, man, is he really going to be able to do it? I bought in personally, and it was one of those things where, obviously I've been a little bit biased, you could say, and, because in my heart I want him to be successful, and so that game really for me, like, on so many levels was probably the lowest point. But needless to say, in hindsight, Mitch was wrong, and, we're world champs.
Right. It was tough for a long time with Pete. But you go back into 2012 and people questioning him for being that crazy guy that's actually going to start Russell Wilson over Matt Flynn. The hindsight has so much. Matt Flynn, right now, just to say it, Matt Flynn, it sounds so stupid to even think that everybody wanted to start Matt Flynn over Russell Wilson. But it made sense at the time, but then you start to get some more perspective. We're trying out the Field Goals comment of the week to try and, reward those that have good comments and say those great things during the week that maybe don't get highlighted. Did anybody bring in a nominee besides myself?
No.
I have a nominee, but I don't remember the comment. I just remember we had Danny, I remember we had that conversation earlier in the week. Someone had a great comment. There's actually the hashtag now, like.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't remember what the comment was.
This is Field Goals.
Go search the This Is Field Goals hashtag.
It's the comment about the goose attack I was telling you.
Yeah, that's the comment. That was mine.
That was the best.
Related, but that was definitely my favorite comment this week.
A guy just for I don't even know what thread it was in, for no reason related a story about how he was attacked by a gaggle of geese, and it's like the most hilariously worded story I've ever read. And it's by Sexy Deep Balls. That's the name of the user.
Okay. We'll try and get this cool list together for future segments. I enjoyed what one of our moderators said, Shams, when I posted about Russell Wilson, and the first comment was this giant picture of us. We have size limits. This was a giant comment. Like, if you go down to the comments, it just took up your whole screen, which normally would be deleted, but it was a giant picture of Russell Wilson smiling, so it was like, I guess I'm not going to delete it. And then Sham's comment being like, hey, size, and then saying, it's too small or whatever like that. There is this iconic sort of this thing going on with Russell Wilson. The guy I don't even understand necessarily how Russell Wilson does any practicing at all anymore. Every time I see a picture of him, he's at another event or whatever. It just seems crazy to me. This is what I guess you get with the Super Bowl, but it's going to be crazy to me to see, like, he's gone into the stratosphere that most Seattle stars, you have to be Ken Griffey Jr., and even then it was like a different era to be able to. I'm just kind of in a tangent right now about Russell Wilson that has nothing to do with what we were talking about, but it is insane how popular he is right now. On the Jimmy Fallon show at the same time as Kanye West. He's probably going to go hang out with Kanye West, right? Like, it's insane to think about.
Well,
hey, guys, just me talking.
The nice thing about your point here is now we'll have something to nitpick next year. If the offense struggles like this year. Well, Russell Wilson didn't work this offseason, so it's all right. We're just, this is great blog fodder for the fall if things don't go as expected, right?
Absolutely. I do not doubt for a second that if Russell Wilson throws for 200 yards and 1 touchdown in his first game, people will say something like that. I got the crown on, so that means it's time.
Holy shit.
It is time for Arthur's Report, segment.
That is amazing.
We have, last week we had an article posted about stat predictions for next season. People are getting ready for their fantasy teams or whatever. but we got some idea of stats in the last 2 years. We have some idea, perhaps, maybe, of what's coming up in the next up for this upcoming season. Scott, basically, I'm going to be accusing someone of charging someone with a stat, and you tell me if that person. You guys are going to tell me if that person is guilty or not guilty. So we're mixing metaphors here. So we'll just start right now. Russell Wilson is accused of throwing for over 4,000 yards next season. Scott, is he guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty. He won't even be charged with the crime.
Not even charged. I like that you're playing along with this. Jackson, could he possibly be guilty of throwing for 4,000 yards?
He could possibly, but the smart money is on no.
Danny, should the SWAT team raid his house and see whether or not he's got 4,000 passing yards in there?
I won't sign that warrant now. I don't think that's going to happen.
Oh, we're money with this one.
That's 3 people that are not going to charge him with a crime. Not guilty. Okay.
Well, how is it following your head around? That's what I'm
Freaking, what other hats are there? Can you get your hat?
We need to all get hats. Oh, my God.
Oh my God, it's freaking scary.
There's been some talk, obviously about Marshawn Lynch's contract situation and the amount that Kristen Michael will play this upcoming year, and whether or not Lynch is, they're probably going to try and make sure he doesn't get 1,500 yards for that bonus. Who knows? Danny, Marshawn Lynch, should I charge him with rushing for 1,100 yards this upcoming season?
Ooh. I'm going to say not guilty. I think it's going to be more of a timeshare this year. I think it's going to be with the thought that they want to preserve him for late in the year.
It's a tough call right there at 1,100 yards. You can't imagine him not rushing for 1,000 yards, but where's he going to get?
1,001.
1,001. Scott, should we issue a warrant for 1,100 yards, Marshawn Lynch rushing only?
Guilty. Yeah,
Guilty.
I think he gets 1,100. I do agree with Danny that Michael will be a part of it, but I think that'll actually come at Turbin's expense, not Lynch's. So I do think we get 1,100.
Jackson, you're going to be the deciding factor whether or not we throw him in the slammer. Is Marshawn Lynch guilty of 1,100 rushing yards?
Assuming he's healthy for all 6.
Oh, you got one too.
Here's the key. You just got to think really hard about what you want on your head, and then it shows up.
Okay, hold
on. That's about, I think, off the top of my swashbuckling head, about 73 yards a game if he's healthy for the whole thing, and that sounds just about right. So I'm giving him a soft guilty.
Marshawn Lynch, you're going to have to show up for your court date this time. Is Percy Harvin going to be guilty of 1,000 receiving yards for the first time in his career, but he is the unquestioned number 1 receiver, if healthy? Jackson, Percy Harvin, guilty of 1,000 yards?
All-purpose or receiving?
Receiving.
Not guilty. I don't think they'll pass enough.
Scott.
Did I do it? Did I do it?
A dog pun here.
Who let the dogs out? This is awesome.
Not exactly. Scott, is Percy Harvin guilty of 1,000 yards? Receiving yards.
Receiving only. Oh, his health is what makes it hard. I believe they're going to have the opportunities to do that. It's just a matter of where he's at health-wise, and I think I'm going to, until I can see him, really prove to be healthy, I'm going to have to go doubt his ability to get the 1,000. I'm going to say not guilty.
Got 2 not guilties. Danny, are you going to make it unanimous?
Yeah, I think he's get. I think.
Danny, take out that silly fake beard, man.
Do I have a thing now?
No.
Oh, dang it.
Just think really hard, and it'll show up.
I'm gonna get if he's healthy, and I'm just gonna assume he is because I'm a optimist at heart. I think he'll get like 70 catches, and it'll be more like 800 or 700, 800 yards. You know, because he's going to be catching like a lot of bubble passes, bubble screens, and things like that. I think his yard per catch will probably be closer to like, 11 or 12 or 13. It's not going to be up in the 16s or anything like that. I think, So that's kind of where I'm going. I didn't do the math obviously, but that would be just like off the back of my off the cuff sort of thing.
I'm only the judge. I'm not one of the lawyers here, but I will say that Percy Harvin back in 2012, he did have 62 catches for 677 yards, pretty much in half of a season before he got hurt. There is some precedent for him getting perhaps 90 to 100 catches that would put him in that 1,000 to 1,200 yards. But we'll see. He's definitely a situation where I don't think that he's necessarily. I think he's going to have the opportunities if he's healthy. Richard Sherman has 8 interceptions in each of the last 2 seasons. The guy is an interceptions machine, and even without getting targeted hardly ever last season, he still had 8 interceptions. Scott, is Richard Sherman guilty of 5 interceptions this season?
5? Oh yeah, guilty. I thought you were going to say 8 again, and I don't think he gets 8 again. But 5, I think he's guilty of.
I think 8. If I would put 8, I would say that 8 is, again, like you said, it was almost a no-brainer, too high to predict that. That's like, you don't want to predict that someone's going to hit 50 home runs, even if it's, like Jose Bautista. You just don't want to predict that high. 5 is still pretty high for a guy, especially a number 1 that's not going to get a lot of catches. But I see what you're saying. Danny, is he guilty of 5?
Yeah.
Jackson, are you just going to make this unanimous? Obviously, he's guilty of 5 interceptions.
Yeah, I'm actually curious how many guys have ever had consecutive 8 interception seasons. That's got to be like a count them on one hand list.
You're probably right. I don't know necessarily, but I've done some research he's got 20 interceptions in his career. He's only started for 2.5 seasons. I mean, you'd have to go back to like Night Train Lane, who had like 14 interceptions in 1 season. But there aren't very many guys that have caught this many in 3 years. The last one is this. Paul Richardson is accused of having more yards than Kristen Michael. Danny, is Paul Richardson guilty of having more yards this season than Kristen Michael?
Yeah. I think so, yeah. That's a tough one, though.
Scott, Paul Richardson, the receiver, Kristen Michael, the running back. Who's going to have more yards this year?
Paul Richardson, it sounds like all indications just kind of out of camp and OTAs and whatnot. Sorry, I just love these little hats. It sounds like he's almost exceeded expectations so far, for whatever that's worth. I do think just his speed and the way he can stretch a defense and all those things. I just think he's going to get more chances to do it than Michael will. Even though I do think Michael will play a little bit more, obviously, than we've seen. But I'm going to go ahead and give guilty.
Jackson, Kristen Michael's #1 fan, Bevins. Paul Richardson is accused of having more yards than your boy. Is he guilty?
So we're talking yards from scrimmage? Like this is Kristen Michael's rushing and receiving versus Paul Richardson's receiving?
This is just Richardson's receiving versus Michael's running.
Oh, Richardson.
But you think that maybe if you put in Michael with his catches, he gets 100 yards, and that's going to put him over the top?
Well, I don't think either of them are going to get a ton of yards this year. They're probably both, I would presume, on the south side of 600 yards. So, 80 to 150 receiving yards, probably enough to make a difference. But if we're just going Richardson receiving versus Michael rushing, I think Richardson gets them.
That's a fair evaluation. And
here's a question. Say Richardson's yards per catch is 15 at least. He would have to catch 31 balls to break the 500 mark. You think he'll hit that? 31 catches. And do you think 15 yards per catch is about where he'll end up being?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Let me I'd be curious to see what the Seahawks receiving leaders were last year. I don't know if any of you guys have that off the top of your head. I certainly don't.
I have a power hat on the top of my head, but I don't have receiving stats.
Basically, you just had Baldwin and Tate in the 700, 800, but then after that, Mac Miller at 398 or something like 396.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I'm looking at it now, and you got Golden Tate essentially 900, Doug Baldwin just south of 8, and then no one else above 4. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. Is Paul Richardson better than Jermaine Kearse in year 1? Is he, how much better? Is he twice as good? I mean, 31 catches it's a couple a game, and receiver is a position that takes a while to develop. There's a 3-year rule for receivers, and the exceptions are truly exceptional people. So
what was Golden Tate's stats his first year? Because I even though the positions will be different, I feel like maybe that's the most comparable way to look at it in terms of value on the pick, right? Both second-round picks, right?
Yeah, so that's good. Let me check here. I mean,
Golden Tate's first 2 years were very good.
Golden had 21 catches his first year for 227 yards.
Obviously, he had playbook issues, and I think he'll be used a little bit differently. But I think that maybe that's kind of a good barometer for what we measure Richardson with.
I would say 20, 25.
If he gets 2 catches a game in a bottom 5 passing attempts offense, that's a pretty damn good rookie season.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a glaring positional hole there for the Seahawks. They've got really productive guys. It's not like he's going to be a number 1 option right off the bat. The Seahawks don't throw enough to get a lot of guys a lot of catches anyway. And I think there's at least 2 guys that are going to be noticeably better in 2014 than Paul Richardson.
Yeah.
So I don't think he gets 31, but I don't think it's an unrealistic total, and it'd be really exciting if he can get in the 30-40 catch range.
Well, Danny, you talked earlier about gimmick players, and I don't think that Paul Richardson is a gimmick player, but I do think that it's sort of more of a when you have those guys that you're like, oh, that 1 or 2 times that he can do that thing. But I think Paul Richardson's more of a guy that this year they're expecting him to be that guy that is sort of around, but then maybe 4 or 5 times during the season he has a huge play. I'm seeing more of a guy that's just going to be around and then, whoa, he just had 70 yards. I think it's going to come in big major bursts like that until he becomes more of a every down player.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too.
I got one for you, Kenneth. I got a guilty, not guilty.
All right.
13 wins again. Or this is say more wins than last year or less wins. Guilty or not guilty of more wins or not guilty.
I'd say that
or the same. So let's say they get to 13, right?
I think that they are guilty of 13 wins, and I do think that someone was telling me before that just before the Super Bowl that the Seahawks, he had thought that Seahawks were going to go undefeated in 2014, and this was something that he had in the works for a long time in his head, and it made sense to me to think, there's no reason that they should be worse than they were last year. They retained all of the important players. They lost the players that were, Clement. They lost a lot of players, but I don't think they lost, a lot of snaps. But I don't think that they lost anyone that was really. I don't think any of the losses are detrimental. The hardest thing is they play like 8 or 9 games against teams in the top 10 of DVOA. So they've got an extremely tough schedule with the Saints and the Panthers and not both those teams. The Panthers and the Packers, and the Packers are going to be better. So it's a really tough schedule. But at the same time, I think they're the best team in the NFL except for the 49ers, by like 2 notches. So I think they're that much better than the rest of the NFL with the 49ers. So for me, I would say guilty. What about you, Danny?
I'm going to say, if I had to guess right now, I think it'd be like 12 or 11. I think I agree with you in the fact that the Niners and they are probably a step ahead of most NFL teams, but I think it's going to take a lot for them to get back to 13, especially with how difficult their their schedule is, especially at the back end when it's like, 8 straight games versus NFC West teams for some reason.
Let's just say this. It's always hard to predict anyone's going to win 13 games because it's a lot of wins. To predict that someone will win 13 or 14 or 15 games. But at the same time, if I asked you, do you think a team will win 13 games next year? Do you think some team will win 14 games next year? Then you have to say, okay, I do think that some team will. So who has the best chance to do that? Now, the Seahawks may have one of the most difficult schedules, but they're also, I don't necessarily think that the Packers are going to win 13 or 14 games because I don't think they have enough talent. I think they have too many holes in certain areas. So it would be, maybe if I was going to have any team in the NFL, it would be either the Broncos or the 49ers that could have a better record, just because I think the 49ers are equally as talented as the Seahawks, just about. But that little tiny 2-game difference in their schedule might be the difference that gets them that one extra win. So, and the Broncos play the shit AFC West and the shit AFC. So I think the Broncos are so much better than the rest of the AFC that they could definitely get 16 wins even. But we'll see.
Jackson, if you need to take off, man.
Yeah, probably here pretty quick.
You need to break the tie, though.
Yeah, I'm with Danny. I think we're looking. I'm anticipating more in that 10, 11, 12 range. Again, it's easy, I imagine, for fans of every reigning championship team to think that this is just how it is from now on. But NFL is incredibly adaptive, and people have 6 months to see what made the Seahawks successful and how to stop it. New systems come into the league all the time, and then new systems come in to contradict those ones. So I think they could still win the Super Bowl, getting in at 10-6 or 11-5, but I don't think they're going to win 13 games this year.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm lost in necessarily a haze of just winning the Super Bowl either.
No, you're not, and I don't mean to accuse you of that. I know you're.
No, but I do know what you're saying. That's the most difficult part about being a Seahawks fan right now is knowing how to step out. Because it's like this is uncharted territory for us. But at the same time, I just think I have to look at the fact that I thought the Seahawks were going to win the Super Bowl last year. I didn't think they were going to win the year before. It was just a matter of, okay, this is the best team, and I think that they're good enough. If their schedule wasn't so hard, like if they played in the AFC South, if they played Andrew Luck's schedule, I could see them going 16-0. There is that, but at the same time,
You're accounting for the schedule difficulty in conceding the 3 wins. You're thinking even they're good enough for 13, and
right.
Whereas we're kind of saying the schedule is difficult. It's hard to do everything.
Sure, if the Seahawks are playing a league average schedule, I think they're one of the 2 or 3 best rosters in the NFL. I think they're the best roster in the NFL. And Kenneth makes a great point that, yeah, some team will probably win 13 or more games this year. It happens almost every year. Probably does happen every year. And the Seahawks are on the short list of contenders to do that. But, it's a tough schedule, and they face a lot of really good coaches this year, and that can't be overlooked. When you're a good team and you may be more talented, you can lose to a great game plan. So, anyway, I mean 10-12. If the Seahawks go 11-5, probably be folks wanting to tear their hair out and all these things. But like I said, I still think they're the best team in the NFL. They can still win a Super Bowl, even if they get beat a few times.
And I do think that if they went 11-5, I don't think that they would have that much worse of a chance. Just if they had lost, 2 games by 3 points, if they have these close, I don't think they're necessarily that worse off going into the playoffs. They're still going to be the same team, 11-5 or 13-3, and they are better at home, but they're not bad on the road.
Yeah, they were a great team last year. I think they were the best team in the NFL last year, and they were a few plays away from a 10 or 11 win season. It doesn't take that much. 4 or 5 games a year, it's going to come down to a play or two. And when everyone's good, those are kind of coin flip plays. And Seahawks came out on the right end of a lot of close games, and there's definitely some skill to that, but it's not universal. So, Yeah, I think they're still the best bet to win the Super Bowl, but every year, even the best bet to win the Super Bowl still gets a 6-1, 5-1 type odds. It's just hard to do.
Yeah, and in 2012 they went 11-5, and they lost to the Dolphins and the Lions by games they shouldn't have lost. So yeah, there's no that difference between 12 and 13. It's good. Well, I know that rather than just let Jackson go, we can probably just let everyone go. That was all I had on the agenda. If there's anything else that anyone wants to interject,
we could have people write. If anyone's still listening to the end, have people write suggestions on topics and things like that, because kind of open it up for that. I think you probably already do that. So
yeah, it's all of our props and cool things that we discovered.
That's like a sea change moment for us. It's huge.
I feel like Mike Holmgren with this stash right now.
It's a watershed right there.
Well, actually, hold on. This is a little more Holmgren-ish, right? This one. Okay.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I need to go coach Sean Alexander now or something.
So you can follow Scott at Scott Enyeart, ENYEART. Am I right?
Animal.
And Jackson Bevins at Jackson Bevins, Danny Kelly at Field Goals. Don't be tricked. And me at Kenneth Arthur S. Read Field Goals. And have a great day. Okay.
See you guys.
Thanks for coming on.